Hello everyone, in this video I'll be installing an amplifier and a subwoofer in my car, which is a 99 Ford Laser. So if you're trying to do something similar, I hope this video will be helpful. Let's get into the tools you need. You'll need a wire cutter, some socket wrenches of any kind, a screwdriver set, a multimeter, and a wiring kit for the amplifier. Also make sure your radio has RCA outputs for external amplifiers, which most of them will do. But it's best to make sure, so check your radio model online. Now first things first is that you need to look for any wiring holes in the firewall. There are plenty of guides on how to find them on YouTube. For older cars there should be plenty. I will be using this plastic covered hole for the clutch pedal for the manual model of this car. It's large and it's easy to guide the wire through. And now we'll be looking for a grounding point. Depending on where you install the amplifier, there should be places you can ground, either under the front seat, the rear seats, or the trunk. By using the multimeter, use the long cable in the wiring kit and connect it to the negative terminal on your battery and turn the multimeter to measure resistance. And now you can test how good a bolt is to be used as ground. When measuring resistance, make sure the red probe goes to the battery negative terminal and the black probe to the ground point. Here's the shock mount as an example for resistance. Here's the option for under-seat installations, the seat bolt itself. It should be a good point because it bolts directly to the car's frame. If the multimeter reads a very low number, it is a good grounding point. Once again, the multimeter is jumping all over the place. I recommend that you remove the bolt and actually use the grounding cable to test it out because the probe is not all that reliable because it's really small contact points. I will show you a good reading once I get to the trunk, which is where I will be installing my amplifier. Another option here is the seat belt bolt, but it is not recommended that you use that as a ground. It is what the internet tells me during my research, so I won't recommend it either. As a last resort, you could always make a ground yourself by scraping some paint off and drilling holes in the car. That requires more work, but it will work as well. Here is the rear seat bolts, which you can access by folding down the rear seats on either side. There are 2 of them per side, and I'll be testing this more properly by removing the bolt. Use a socket wrench or an impact wrench if it's too tight. And here's the ground cable properly bolted into place. The multimeter now shows a steady number around 1 point something, so that is a good place for ground, and this is where I will be installing the amplifier as well. Before we begin, there is also another way to test the power to the ground, and is to test the actual voltage. So plug the wire to the positive terminal and switch the multimeter to measure voltage up to 20 volts. And remember to probe the red to the battery and black to the ground, which is opposite to what we were doing while measuring resistance. And now the meter should read the battery's voltage, just like if you were to measure the car's battery itself. So this will work. And now we move on to the installation. An important note before moving any further, make sure to disconnect the power cables here. Now the fuse holder is recommended to be installed nearby the battery, so you can find a place that works. There are plenty of places that are not too hot where you can install it, but I'll be easy on it and just put it right on top of the battery. Just make sure you secure it properly so it doesn't go anywhere. Next up is to route the wire into the car. I'll be using the hole that I found earlier. So you can drill a hole or any way you see fit and guide the wire through. Run it along the firewall or the top of the firewall and make sure it's not touching or getting too near to the engine block or any exhaust, or it'll get too hot and probably melt. I'll tie it up with the brake lines along to the brake booster, and there it goes into the car. Now I'll be drilling a small hole in just enough for the wire through this plastic cover, and then cover it with some silicone sealant. That should work pretty well, and it should last for a long time. Now go into the car and look for where the wire is coming through. Now leave it there for now, as there are a couple more wires to route together to the trunk. We move to the radio. There are many ways to pop out the head unit, but I'll be using the butter knife method I found on a YouTube guide, and it'll work. Reach your hand to the back to give it a little push, and hopefully it'll come off easy. If you're finding it difficult, Make sure the knives are still in place because there is a little bit of a clip key in there, and use a needle plier to yank it out. Once it's out of its clips, slowly wiggle it out and don't pull it too hard, as some wires may be tangled at the back. Take it easy and pull it all the way out, and there we are. The radio is out and we are ready to install the remote wire and the RCA cables. On this particular radio, there are blue wires that are for the remote wire. So I'll strip the wires and connect them to the remote cable, which should be a thin cable that came along with the wiring kit, and also plug in the RCA cables and route them on the back together with the power cables. At this stage, you can test out the radio to make sure it's all working. So turn on the ignition and test out the radio. Make sure the speakers are still making sound, so that you know that none of the other cables are disturbed or disconnected. Now that all the cables are connected, it is time to route them to the trunk or under the seat if you chose to install the amplifier there. The door sills are pretty easy to come off. Simply pull it up from the inside and it simply just peels off. The carpet underneath is just held on by these clamps, and now we can see some space for the cable to run through. Now make sure it's not going over the pedals and guide them underneath the pedals into the side carpet through the fuse box. It should be a relatively clean run into the carpet from there. Remove a little bit of the rubber trim so the cable can run through easier. You'll notice there is a black cable here already. This is for the dash cam that I installed. It runs through the same place, so it's pretty easy to do this as well if you choose to install a dash cam with a rear camera. Now the center panel is also easy to remove. Use a plastic piece to prevent scratching the paint and pry it off from the bottom to the top. It is shaped like a clamp itself, so it's pretty easy to take off and put back. Stuff the wires underneath the carpet and do the same for the rear door sills. Quick reminder that I'm just an amateur gaining experience on installing these things myself, so it may not be the cleanest job or the safest job, but we are gonna start somewhere, and a cheap used car is the perfect place to do this, because it's old and you feel a little less bad if things go wrong. So let's keep going. And here is where the RCA and remote wire will be joining the power cable, going through the trunk popper hole. Once the plastic cover is on, you never even notice it's there. Otherwise, you can always run it through the pedals along with the cable, and that's up to you. Once the wires are through the rear door sill, simply guide it through between the seat base and the upper seat. There are plenty of spaces there, and here we are, all the wires to the trunk. I am lucky that this wiring kit is just long enough to reach the back of the trunk. Now let's get the amplifier and the subwoofer plugged in. Now plugging in the amplifier is pretty straightforward. Power cable to the power, remote to the middle, and the ground to the ground where I installed it into the seat board earlier. And for subwoofers, connect it to bridge to the amplifier, which is usually the outside connectors. There usually will be a writing where you can see the word bridge. And there we are, the installation is complete. Now secure the whole set, and it's time to test out if it all works. Install the power cable to the battery. Open up a socket and put the connector inside, and tighten it back. Now you can turn on the car and see if the amplifier turns on. Now just a quick refresh, the remote and RCA cable goes in the radio, the power cable to the battery, the ground cable to a good grounding point. If all of these are done, the amplifier should be on, and there we go. Now take your time to put everything back into place. The radio, the wires behind the radio, make sure it's all wired up and covered, the door sills, the cables all tied up nicely, and your car should now sound much better with a nice subwoofer. I hope this video has helped you DIY your own car, and if I did anything wrong, do let me know so I don't repeat them on my next project. Thanks for watching. Coming up is a sound test with music from No Copyright YouTube.